Karoline Leavitt lived a quiet life in a small, sleepy town where not much ever happened. She worked at the local library, surrounded by shelves of books and the faint smell of paper that had been there for decades. Her days were predictable: helping patrons find novels, organizing bookshelves, and occasionally recommending titles to people who seemed unsure of what they wanted. It wasn't an exciting life, but it was comfortable. Comfortable, however, didn't mean fulfilling. There were moments when Karoline felt like something was missing, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. On one particular Friday evening, after finishing work earlier than usual, Karoline decided to step out of her routine. She hadn't treated herself to dinner in ages, so she chose a cozy diner on Main Street, a place known for its friendly staff and hearty meals. The diner was warm and inviting, with soft lighting and the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread wafting through the air. As she walked in, she spotted an empty booth near the window and slid into it, glad to have some time to herself. She picked up the menu, scanning the options while letting her mind wander. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. For a brief moment, Karoline allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to live a more adventurous life. But those thoughts quickly faded as reality set in. Adventure wasn't really her thing. She preferred stability over uncertainty. Still, she couldn't shake off the nagging feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than what she currently had. As Karoline flipped through the menu, trying to decide between the grilled chicken sandwich and the vegetable lasagna, her attention drifted toward the activity around her. The diner was bustling with customers, some chatting loudly, others quietly sipping coffee or digging into their meals. That's when she noticed her. A young waitress moving briskly between tables carrying heavy trays stacked with plates of food. She looked exhausted, her feet probably aching from hours of standing, but she wore a smile that never faltered. There was something admirable about her determination even amidst the chaos. But then, something else caught Karoline's eye. At a nearby table, a boy sat with his caregiver. He appeared to be around 10 years old, though it was hard to tell, because of his physical condition. His arms lay stiffly at his sides, and he seemed unable to pick up the fork placed neatly beside his plate. Karoline watched as the caregiver tried to encourage him to eat, but it was clear he needed assistance. Without hesitation, the same waitress who had been rushing between tables stopped by the boy's side. She didn't say anything dramatic or make a big show of it. Instead, she simply knelt down slightly, picked up the fork, and began feeding him bite by bite. What struck Karoline most wasn't just the act itself, it was the way the waitress did it. There was no rush, no impatience, only calmness and care. Each movement was deliberate, each gesture filled with kindness. The boy, too, responded differently now. His face lit up with every bite, as if the simple act of being fed wasn't just nourishing his body but also lifting his spirit. Karoline found herself staring, captivated by the scene unfolding before her. It wasn't extraordinary in the grand scheme of things, yet it felt profoundly human. For the first time in a long while, Karoline felt a lump rise in her throat. Something about this moment resonated deeply within her. Maybe it was the contrast between her own mundane existence and the raw humanity displayed right in front of her. Or perhaps it was the realization that she rarely went out of her way to help others anymore. Life had become so focused on getting through the day that she hadn't stopped to think about how she could make someone else's day better. Sitting there in that booth, watching the waitress feed the boy, Karoline realized she wanted to be more like her. Not just helpful, but genuinely kind. By the time the waitress came over to take her order, Karoline couldn't resist asking, "Do you always do things like that?" Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, as if she feared intruding. The waitress paused for a moment, looking surprised by the question. Then she smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile, and replied, "Sometimes people just need a little extra kindness." Those words lingered in Karoline's mind long after the meal ended, and she stepped back out into the cool night air. That night, as Karoline lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her thoughts kept circling back to what she had witnessed at the diner. She couldn't stop picturing the waitress feeding the boy, one gentle bite at a time, and the way both of them seemed so focused on that small but meaningful act. It wasn't just about the food, it was about connection, patience, and humanity. These were things Karoline realized she hadn't been paying much attention to lately. She thought about her own life, the routines, the quiet evenings alone, the way she often passed by people without really seeing them. How many times had she walked past someone struggling with groceries or holding a door for another person, too absorbed in their phone to notice? She'd always told herself she was busy, that everyone else was managing fine on their own. But deep down she knew better. Life wasn't supposed to be lived behind walls of indifference. Somewhere along the way, she had let herself become disconnected from the world outside her comfort zone. The more Karoline reflected, the heavier her heart felt. She began to wonder, what if she could do something, anything, to make even a tiny difference in someone's life? The idea excited her, but it also scared her. Where would she even start? Wasn't helping others something only special people did? People who had more time, more energy, more courage than she did? Yet the memory of the waitress refused to leave her mind. If someone working long hours at a diner could find time to show kindness, surely she could too. The next morning, instead of heading straight to work, Karoline sat down at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee and opened her laptop. She started typing phrases into the search bar: ways to help disabled children, volunteering opportunities near me, how to support caregivers. Page after page of results popped up, each one offering a glimpse into organizations and programs dedicated to making life easier for families facing challenges. Some focused on providing therapy services, while others organized recreational activities or offered financial assistance. There were so many ways to get involved. It was overwhelming but also inspiring. One program stood out to Karoline immediately. It was a local community center that worked with kids who had various disabilities. They needed volunteers to assist during activity sessions, help organize events, and even spend one-on-one time with the children. Reading about it made Karoline's chest tighten, not out of fear this time, but out of excitement. This was exactly the kind of thing she'd been searching for. Helping kids sounded daunting, sure, but maybe that was part of the point. Maybe stepping outside her comfort zone was exactly what she needed to grow. For days, Karoline debated whether she should actually sign up. Doubts crept in constantly. What if she messed up? What if she said or did the wrong thing? What if the kids didn't like her? But then she remembered the waitress again. The calmness, the confidence, the natural way she approached the boy at the diner. Maybe she didn't have to be perfect. Maybe all she needed was to show up and try. Finally, one evening after work, Karoline filled out the online application form. Her hands trembled slightly as she clicked submit. But once it was done, a wave of relief washed over her. She had taken the first step, however small it might seem. Over the next few days, she received an email confirming her acceptance and inviting her to attend an orientation session. As she read through the details, Karoline felt a mix of nerves and anticipation bubbling inside her. This was real now. No turning back. When the day of the orientation arrived, Karoline dressed carefully, wanting to look presentable yet approachable. Walking into the community center, she was greeted by colorful murals painted on the walls and the sound of laughter echoing down the hallway. The staff welcomed her warmly, explaining the mission of the center and introducing her to some of the other volunteers. Everyone seemed friendly and eager to help, which helped ease her initial anxiety. During the training session, Karoline learned about the different needs of the children who visited the center. Some struggled with mobility, others with communication, and still others with sensory processing. Each child was unique, requiring individualized care and understanding. The trainers emphasized the importance of patience, empathy, and flexibility. "You don't need to have all the answers," one of them said. "Just being there means more than you realize." By the end of the session, Karoline felt both humbled and hopeful. She understood now that this wasn't going to be easy. It would require effort, learning, and plenty of mistakes along the way. But she also knew it was worth it. For the first time in years, she felt like she was doing something bigger than herself, something meaningful. As she left the community center that day, she couldn't help but smile. The journey ahead was uncertain, but she was ready to take it one step at a time. Karoline's first day volunteering at the community center arrived sooner than she expected. She woke up that morning feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. Her stomach churned as she thought about meeting the kids for the first time. What if they didn't like her? What if she said or did something wrong? These questions swirled in her mind as she got ready, but she reminded herself why she was doing this, to step outside her comfort zone and make a difference no matter how small. When she walked into the center, the atmosphere immediately put her at ease. The walls were covered with bright murals of animals, trees, and smiling faces. Toys were scattered around the play area, and the sound of laughter filled the air. It wasn't chaos, it was life, vibrant and full of energy. A staff member greeted her warmly and introduced her to the other volunteers who were already busy, setting up activities for the day. They handed her a name tag and gave her a quick rundown of what to expect. "Just take it slow," one of the volunteers told her with an encouraging smile. "The kids will guide you more than you think." Her first task was to help organize a craft session where the children would paint pictures using sponges and brushes. At first, Karoline stood back, watching how the other volunteers interacted with the kids. She noticed how they knelt down to meet them at eye level, spoke softly, and offered gentle guidance without taking over. It was clear these volunteers weren't just there to supervise, they were there to connect. Slowly, Karoline began to feel less like an outsider and more like part of the team. One boy caught her attention almost immediately. He looked about 8 years old, with curly hair and wide eyes that sparkled with curiosity. His movements were slow and deliberate, and he seemed hesitant to join the group. When Karoline approached him, she crouched down so they were at the same height. "Hi there," she said softly. "Do you want to try painting today?" The boy didn't respond right away. Instead, he glanced toward one of the caregivers who nodded encouragingly. After a moment, he reached out and grabbed a sponge. Karoline helped him dip it into the paint and press it onto the paper. The look of wonder on his face when he saw the colorful imprint was something Karoline would never forget. For the next few minutes, they worked together, creating shapes and patterns. Every time he laughed or pointed excitedly at his work, Karoline felt a warmth spread through her chest. As the day went on, Karoline found herself growing more comfortable. She learned quickly that each child had their own way of communicating. Some spoke clearly, while others used gestures or facial expressions. One girl loved to clap whenever she finished a task, while another boy preferred to sit quietly and observe before joining in. Karoline realized that helping wasn't about fixing anything. It was about being present and letting the kids lead the way. By the end of the session, her clothes were splattered with paint, her shoes scuffed from running around, and her cheeks hurt from smiling so much. But she didn't care. For the first time in ages, she felt truly alive. As she waved goodbye to the kids, she promised herself she'd come back again, and not just because she wanted to help. She came back because she enjoyed it. Because seeing those smiles, hearing those giggles made her feel like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Over the next few weeks, Karoline became a regular at the center. She started recognizing the kids' faces and learning their personalities. There was the boy who loved cars and could spend hours lining them up in perfect rows. There was the girl who adored music and would hum tunes under her breath while playing with blocks. And then there was the boy who reminded her so much of the one she'd seen at the diner, the one with stiff arms who needed help holding utensils. This boy, too, struggled with basic tasks, but had a radiant smile that lit up the room. Helping him master small victories like stacking blocks or holding a crayon filled Karoline with a sense of accomplishment she hadn't known before. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Some days were harder than others. There were moments when a child grew frustrated and lashed out, or when Karoline accidentally misunderstood what someone needed. On those days, she questioned whether she was cut out for this kind of work. But every time doubt crept in, she remembered the waitress at the diner, the calmness, the patience, the unwavering kindness. If that woman could do it, so could she. What surprised Karoline most was how much she learned from the kids. They taught her to slow down, to celebrate tiny achievements, and to find joy in the simplest things. Watching them persevere despite their challenges inspired her to tackle her own fears. She realized that everyone struggles in their own way, and sometimes all it takes is someone willing to stand beside you to make the journey a little easier. Word of Karoline's dedication began to spread among the staff and other volunteers. They noticed how attentive she was, how she always went the extra mile to make sure the kids felt seen and valued. One of the coordinators pulled her aside one afternoon and said, "You're making such a difference here. Have you ever thought about doing more?" Karoline hesitated. Doing more sounded daunting, but also exciting. She had spent so long living within the confines of her routine, afraid to take risks. Now standing in this bustling center surrounded by laughter and love, she wondered what else she might be capable of. Maybe there was more she could do. Not just for the kids, but for their families too. Families who often carried burdens no one else could see. That night as she drove home, Karoline felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about volunteering anymore. It was about building connections, creating spaces where people felt supported and understood. She didn't know exactly where this path would lead, but she knew one thing for certain. She was ready to keep walking it. Karoline's time at the community center had become a cornerstone of her life. Each visit brought new challenges and small victories, but more than anything, it brought clarity. She was starting to see the world differently, not as a place where people simply coexisted, but as a web of connections waiting to be strengthened. The kids weren't just faces anymore. They were individuals with stories, dreams, and struggles that touched her deeply. And their families? They were the unsung heroes carrying burdens most people couldn't even imagine. One afternoon, after a particularly lively session of games and crafts, Karoline found herself chatting with a caregiver who often brought one of the boys to the center. The woman looked tired. Dark circles under her eyes told the story of sleepless nights, and her hands trembled slightly as she sipped her coffee. But despite her exhaustion, she smiled warmly when she spoke about her son. "He loves coming here," she said. "It's his happy place." Her words stuck with Karoline long after the conversation ended. A happy place. That's what the center was for so many of these kids and their families. A refuge from the difficulties of daily life. But what happened when they left? What support did they have outside those walls? Karoline knew all too well how isolating it could feel to carry a heavy load alone. Her mind began racing with possibilities. Could she do something to help ease the burden on these families? That evening, instead of heading straight home, Karoline stopped by the library where she worked. It felt strange being there after hours, but she needed space to think. She sat at one of the tables, flipping through books and articles about community support systems. She read about programs that provided respite care for overwhelmed parents, workshops that taught coping strategies, and events designed to bring families together in safe, judgment-free environments. The more she learned, the clearer it became. This was the next step she'd been searching for. The idea came to her suddenly like a spark igniting a flame. What if she organized something similar right in her own town? Something tailored specifically to the needs of the families she'd come to know at the center. At first, the thought terrified her. Organizing an event required planning, resources, and coordination. Things she wasn't sure she was qualified to handle. But then she remembered the waitress at the diner again. Had she hesitated before feeding the boy? No. She'd acted because it was the right thing to do. Maybe Karoline didn't need qualifications. Maybe she just needed heart. She started small, reaching out to the staff at the community center to share her idea. To her surprise, they were thrilled. One coordinator even offered to help brainstorm logistics and connect her with local organizations that might provide funding or supplies. Encouraged by their enthusiasm, Karoline began drafting plans for a family day. A chance for parents, siblings, and kids to come together for fun activities, shared meals, and mutual support. The weeks leading up to the event were a whirlwind of preparation. Karoline spent countless hours making phone calls, sending emails, and visiting local businesses to ask for donations. Some turned her down, but many others stepped up, offering everything from gift cards to snacks to volunteers, willing to lend a hand. With each yes, Karoline's confidence grew. This wasn't just her project anymore. It was becoming a community effort. On the day of the event, nerves bubbled inside her like soda fizzing over. She arrived early to set up, arranging tables, hanging decorations, and laying out supplies. As families began trickling in, her anxiety melted away. Kids ran around laughing while parents exchanged hugs and stories over cups of coffee. For the first time, Karoline saw the caregivers not just as helpers but as people who craved connection just as much as anyone else. One activity stood out above the rest, a simple storytelling circle where anyone could share something they were proud of. A young girl talked about learning to tie her shoes. A teenage boy described mastering a video game level after weeks of trying. And then there was a mother who stood up, tears streaming down her face, and thanked everyone for giving her family a day of peace and joy. "We don't get many days like this," she admitted. "Thank you for reminding us we're not alone." By the end of the afternoon, Karoline felt drained but fulfilled. Watching families laugh, play, and lean on each other filled her with a sense of purpose she hadn't known before. People approached her throughout the day to express gratitude, and though she tried to brush off the compliments, they stayed with her. She realized that creating moments of connection mattered, not just for the kids, but for everyone involved. As the sun dipped below the horizon and families began packing up to leave, Karoline took a moment to stand back and watch. The sight of smiling faces, sticky fingers clutching balloons, and arms wrapped around shoulders and hugs made her heart swell. This was why she had started volunteering in the first place, to remind herself and others that kindness ripples outward, touching lives in ways we may never fully understand. But even as she basked in the success of the event, Karoline knew this wasn't the end. If anything, it was only the beginning. She had glimpsed the power of community, and now she wanted to build on it. More events, more outreach, more opportunities to make a difference. It all seemed possible now. For the first time in years, she felt like she was living a life aligned with her values. And she owed it all to a random night at a diner, a kind waitress, and a boy who reminded her of the beauty in humanity. Driving home that night, Karoline allowed herself a quiet smile. She didn't know exactly where this journey would take her, but she knew one thing for certain. She was ready to keep going. The success of the Family Day event stayed with Karoline long after it ended. It wasn't just the laughter or the smiles that lingered. It was the realization that she had tapped into something bigger than herself. For years, she had lived, quietly, content to stay within her comfort zone. But now, stepping outside those boundaries felt less like a challenge and more like a calling. She couldn't unsee the impact of bringing people together, of creating spaces where they could feel seen and supported. In the weeks following the event, Karoline found herself thinking about the families she'd met. Their stories stuck with her, the single mother juggling 3 jobs while caring for a child with special needs, the older sibling who sacrificed hobbies and friendships to help at home, the father who admitted he sometimes felt invisible because everyone focused on his son's condition. These weren't distant struggles, they were real, raw, and happening right in her community. And while one day of connection was meaningful, it wasn't enough. These families needed ongoing support, not just occasional relief. Determined to do more, Karoline began brainstorming ideas. What if she could create something lasting? Something that didn't just exist for a single afternoon, but became a steady presence in their lives. Her mind kept returning to the concept of a network, a group of people coming together to share resources, advice, and encouragement. It wouldn't be easy, but she knew it was possible. After all, hadn't she already proven that small acts of kindness could grow into something much larger? She started by reaching out to the families she'd met through the center. Over coffee or phone calls, she listened to their needs and concerns. Some wanted practical help, things like meal delivery services or childcare during medical appointments. Others craved emotional support, longing for a safe space to vent frustrations without judgment. One parent shared how isolating it felt to navigate challenges alone, wishing there was someone who truly understood what they were going through. Every conversation deepened Karoline's resolve to build something sustainable. With a clearer vision in mind, Karoline decided to form a support group specifically for caregivers. She called it Together We Rise, a name inspired by the resilience she saw in these families every day. The goal was simple: provide a platform where people could connect, share experiences, and lean on each other when times got tough. At first, she worried no one would show up. Who would trust a stranger to lead such an initiative? But then she reminded herself that trust wasn't built overnight. It grew through consistency and genuine care. To get things off the ground, Karoline partnered with the community center again. They offered to host the meetings in their cozy meeting room, complete with soft chairs and warm lighting. Flyers went up around town, and word spread quickly. On the evening of the first meeting, Karoline arrived early, her stomach fluttering, with nerves. She arranged chairs in a circle, set out snacks, and waited anxiously, wondering if anyone would come. Slowly, people began trickling in. A few familiar faces from the Family Day event showed up, along with some new ones. By the time everyone settled in, there were 10 participants, a modest start but enough to fill the room with energy. Karoline opened the session by sharing her own story, explaining how witnessing a kind act at a diner had inspired her journey. Then she invited others to speak, reassuring them there was no pressure to share unless they felt ready. What unfolded next surprised even Karoline. One by one, people began opening up, hesitant at first but gradually gaining confidence. A woman spoke about the guilt she carried for taking breaks, afraid it made her a bad parent. A man admitted he often cried in his car after leaving doctor's appointments, overwhelmed by uncertainty. Another shared how lonely it felt to watch friends drift away because they didn't know how to relate to her situation. As each person spoke, heads nodded in understanding. There were tears, yes, but also laughter and moments of lightness. By the end of the meeting, the room buzzed with a sense of camaraderie. Karoline left that night feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. She had never imagined facilitating a conversation could be so powerful. Listening to these stories reinforced what she already suspected. Everyone carries burdens, but they don't have to carry them alone. The group wasn't just about offering solutions. It was about reminding people they weren't isolated in their struggles. Sometimes knowing someone else understands is enough to lighten the load. As the weeks passed, the meetings became a regular fixture in the community. More people joined, drawn by word of mouth and the promise of finding understanding ears. Karoline noticed subtle changes in herself too. She was becoming bolder, more confident in her ability to lead. Where once she doubted her qualifications, she now trusted her instincts. She learned to listen deeply, to read between the lines of what people said or didn't say, and to offer support without overstepping boundaries. Outside the meetings, Karoline continued volunteering at the center, building stronger bonds with the kids and their families. She realized how interconnected everything was. The joy of helping a child achieve a milestone fed into supporting their parents, which in turn strengthened the entire family unit. It wasn't just about individual actions. It was about fostering a cycle of kindness and resilience. One evening, as she packed up after a particularly lively session of games at the center, a caregiver approached her. "You've changed our lives," the woman said softly, clutching a tissue in her hand. "Before you came along, I thought we were on our own. Now I feel like we're part of something bigger." Her words caught Karoline off guard, bringing tears to her eyes. She hadn't set out to change anyone's life. She'd simply wanted to make a difference. Yet here was proof that even small efforts could ripple outward, touching hearts in ways she couldn't have predicted. That night, as Karoline drove home under a blanket of stars, she reflected on how far she'd come. From a quiet librarian, living a predictable life, she had transformed into someone who dared to dream bigger, to reach further. The waitress at the diner had unknowingly lit a fire within her, a fire fueled by compassion, determination, and a desire to give back. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, Karoline felt ready to face them head-on. For the first time in years, She felt truly alive, not because of recognition or praise, but because she was living a life rooted in purpose. Together We Rise was just the beginning. There was still so much work to be done, so many lives to touch, and Karoline knew deep down that she was exactly where she was meant to be. As the months rolled by, Karoline's efforts began to ripple outward in ways she hadn't anticipated. The support group, Together We Rise, wasn't just a gathering anymore. It had become a lifeline for many families. People who once felt isolated were now forming friendships, exchanging numbers, and even organizing informal meetups outside of the meetings. Kids from the community center started recognizing Karoline on the street, waving enthusiastically or running up to hug her. Strangers approached her at the grocery store to thank her for what she was doing. It was humbling and overwhelming all at once. But with growth came challenges. More families meant more needs, and Karoline quickly realized she couldn't do everything herself. She needed help. More volunteers, better resources, and partnerships with organizations that could offer expertise she didn't have. One evening, after a particularly chaotic day at the center, she sat at her kitchen table staring at a pile of notes and unanswered emails. Her energy was waning and doubt crept in. Was she biting off more than she could chew? Could she really keep this going without burning out? The next morning, she decided to take a walk to clear her head. As she strolled through the park, she noticed a flyer pinned to a bulletin board advertising a local nonprofit fair happening that weekend. On a whim, she decided to attend. The event turned out to be exactly what she needed, a chance to connect with organizations already working in areas she cared about. There were groups specializing in mental health support, respite care programs, and educational workshops for caregivers. Each booth offered something valuable, but one stood out above the rest, a foundation focused on building inclusive communities for people with disabilities. Karoline struck up a conversation with the representative at the booth, sharing her story and explaining the work she'd been doing. To her surprise, the woman listened intently and then said, "We'd love to collaborate." They exchanged contact information, and over the following weeks, plans began to take shape. The foundation agreed to provide training sessions for volunteers at the community center and sponsor some of the activities Karoline organized. In return, Karoline would help them expand their reach by connecting them with the families she worked with. It was a partnership built on mutual respect and shared goals. With this new support system in place, Karoline felt like she could breathe again. The weight she had been carrying lightened, allowing her to focus on what mattered most, making a difference. But she also knew it wasn't enough to rely solely on external help. She needed to empower others within the community to step up too. So she started hosting volunteer orientations at the center, inviting anyone interested to learn how they could contribute. Some signed up to assist during activity sessions. Others offered skills like graphic design or event planning. Slowly, but surely, a team began to form around her. One person who joined the effort was an older gentleman named Tom, who had recently retired. He had no prior experience working with children or families dealing with disabilities. But he showed up, every week eager to lend a hand. Over time, he became an integral part of the team, using his calm demeanor and patience to bond with the kids. Seeing someone like Tom step forward reminded Karoline that compassion didn't require special qualifications. It simply required a willingness to show up. Another unexpected ally came in the form of a young college student interning at the community center as part of her social work program. She brought fresh ideas and boundless enthusiasm, helping Karoline revamp some of the existing programs and introduce new ones. Together, they launched a mentorship initiative pairing teenagers with younger kids, giving both age groups opportunities to grow and learn from each other. Watching these connections blossom filled Karoline with pride. Despite the progress, there were still moments when Karoline questioned whether she was making a real impact. Doubts whispered in her ear late at night when the house was quiet and the weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders. Was she doing enough? Would any of this last beyond her involvement? Then she remembered the waitress at the diner, the way a single act of kindness had sparked a chain reaction leading to all of this. If one moment could change her life, Why couldn't her efforts do the same for others? To remind herself of the bigger picture, Karoline began keeping a journal where she documented stories of impact. A mother wrote about finding the courage to pursue her dream job because of the emotional support she received at the meetings. A teenager described how mentoring a younger child helped him discover his passion for teaching. A caregiver shared how a simple conversation with another parent gave her hope during a dark time. Reading these entries reignited her sense of purpose whenever doubts threatened to creep in. Her transformation didn't go unnoticed by those around her either. Friends and co-workers remarked on how much happier and more fulfilled she seemed. Even patrons at the library commented on her newfound energy, asking what had changed. When she explained her work, their reactions ranged from admiration to curiosity, inspiring some to ask how they could get involved. Karoline realized that her journey wasn't just impacting the families she served. It was inspiring others to think differently about their own capacity to make a difference. One day, while sorting through donations at the center, Karoline stumbled upon a handwritten note tucked inside a box of books. It read, "Thank you for reminding us we're not alone. You've given us hope when we needed it most." The words brought tears to her eyes. She didn't know who had written it, but that didn't matter. What mattered was knowing that her efforts were reaching people in ways she might never fully understand. That night, as she lay in bed reflecting on the day, Karoline thought about the waitress again. The woman whose simple act of feeding a boy had set everything in motion. She wondered if the waitress ever realized the ripple effect of her kindness. Probably not, Karoline mused. Most acts of goodness are done quietly, without expectation of recognition. Yet they leave indelible marks on the world, shaping lives in profound ways. For Karoline, this realization solidified her belief in the power of small actions. She didn't need grand gestures or widespread acclaim to create change. All she needed was consistency, empathy, and a willingness to keep showing up, even when it was hard. And though she knew the road ahead would continue to present challenges, she faced them with a renewed sense of determination. After all, she wasn't just building programs or organizing events. She was weaving a tapestry of connection, one thread at a time. As sleep finally claimed her, Karoline smiled softly into the darkness. Tomorrow would bring its own hurdles, but she was ready. For the first time in her life, she felt truly aligned with her purpose. And nothing could shake that. Years passed, and Karoline's life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. What began as a quiet dinner at a diner had blossomed into something far greater, a movement that touched countless lives, including her own. The support group Together We Rise had grown beyond the walls of the community center, becoming a beacon of hope for families across the town. Meetings were held regularly, workshops flourished, and partnerships with local organizations ensured resources reached those who needed them most. Yet, despite its success, Karoline often found herself reflecting on how it all started, with one simple act of kindness from a stranger. One crisp autumn afternoon, as golden leaves swirled in the breeze, Karoline decided to visit the diner again. It had been years since that fateful evening when she'd witnessed the waitress feeding the boy, but the memory still burned brightly in her mind. She wanted to thank the woman properly, not just for inspiring her journey, but for reminding her of the power of humanity. Stepping inside, she felt a wave of nostalgia wash over her. The cozy atmosphere, the familiar smell of baked goods, and the hum of conversation, it was all exactly as she remembered. To her delight, the same waitress was there, bustling between tables with the same warm smile she'd worn years ago. Karoline hesitated for a moment, unsure how to approach her. Would the waitress even remember that night? Did she know the impact she'd had on someone watching from across the room? Taking a deep breath, Karoline approached her after she finished, serving a table. "Excuse me," Karoline said softly, catching the waitress's attention. "Do you have a moment?" The waitress turned, wiping her hands on her apron, and nodded kindly. "Of course. How can I help you?" Karoline pulled out a folded piece of paper from her bag. a handwritten note she'd carefully crafted earlier that week. Handing it to the waitress, she said, "I wanted to give you this. You might not remember me, but I was here years ago, sitting by the window. I saw what you did for that boy, one bite at a time, and it changed my life forever." The waitress unfolded the note, her eyes scanning the words. Her expression softened and tears welled up as she looked back at Karoline. "You mean all of this started because of that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Karoline nodded, smiling gently. "Yes. That small act of kindness inspired me to do more, to see the world differently. Because of you, I've spent the last few years helping families who needed support. And none of it would have happened if I hadn't seen your compassion that night." The waitress wiped her eyes, overcome with emotion. "I didn't think anyone noticed," she admitted. "I wasn't trying to be special or anything, I just thought, well, he needed help, so I helped." "That's what makes it so beautiful," Karoline replied. "It wasn't about being noticed. It was about doing what was right. But I want you to know, you made a difference, in ways you'll probably never fully understand." They sat down together at an empty booth, talking for hours. The waitress shared stories of her own struggles, juggling work, family, and personal challenges while trying to stay positive. Karoline listened intently, marveling at the strength hidden behind the woman's humble demeanor. By the end of their conversation, they had formed a bond neither expected, but both cherished. They promised to keep in touch, vowing to remind each other of the importance of kindness in a world that often felt chaotic. As Karoline left the diner that day, she felt lighter, as though she'd closed a chapter she hadn't realized was lingering. She carried the waitress's story with her, adding it to the tapestry of connections she'd woven over the years. Every person she'd met, every family she'd supported, and every child who had smiled through adversity, they were all threads in a larger picture of humanity. A picture painted not with grand gestures, but with moments of care, patience, and love. Today, Karoline runs a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting families of children with disabilities. Together We Rise has expanded beyond her small town, reaching communities nationwide. Through fundraisers, advocacy campaigns, and educational programs, the organization ensures no one feels alone in their struggles. Karoline travels frequently, speaking at events and encouraging others to take action in their own corners of the world. Yet despite her growing influence, she remains grounded, always remembering where it all began. When people ask her about the pivotal moment that set her on this path, Karoline doesn't hesitate to recount that evening at the diner. She tells them about the waitress who fed the boy, not because it was her job, but because it was the right thing to do. About how a single act of kindness can ripple outward, touching lives in ways we may never fully understand. And about how, sometimes the smallest gestures hold the greatest power. Her story serves as a reminder that change doesn't require perfection or extraordinary talent. It requires heart, the willingness to show up, to listen, and to care. For Karoline, everything traced back to a waitress whose selflessness sparked a chain reaction leading to a lifetime of purpose. And though the road hasn't always been easy, she wouldn't trade it for anything. Because in giving, she discovered the true meaning of living. On quiet nights when the world slows down and the weight of responsibility lifts briefly, Karoline sits by her window, gazing at the stars. She thinks about the boy at the diner, the waitress, the families she's met along the way, and the countless lives intertwined in this journey. Each one is a testament to the beauty of connection, the strength of community, and the enduring power of kindness. And as she reflects, she smiles softly, knowing she's exactly where she's meant to be.